Well, and I wish you a very warm welcome to this evening session. It's called Real Lives and Real Faith. We're Emmanuel Church in Lethwich, and I'm Dovan, just the pastor at the church here. And this series has been interviewing various people who are coming along. It's the second in the series this evening. Next month, we're hoping to have a medical doctor going to be interviewing. Her name is Lisa Williams. And in December, professor and scientist Stuart Burgess, who's going to be joining us from Bristol University. But this evening, we've got a friend called Jamie Kidd, who's come to share his story with us. We're really pleased that he's come. And there's an opportunity for this to be a little bit interactive as best we can. And if anybody has any questions you'd like to ask, questions that I don't cover perhaps, or you'd like to know a little bit more, well, the number, if I can point my finger that way, is there. If you've got any questions, 07555 813 524. That number's there for you to text in, and at the end of the interview, there'll be a chance to maybe cover some of those questions. So we hope that'll be an encouragement for you. So first of all, Jamie, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Now tell us where you're kind of tuning in from, because you're not too far away. Is that right?
No, not too far away. I'm tuning in from an attic in Manchester, Didsbury, Manchester.
Oh, right. Okay. And apparently you just moved in, so it's the attic's probably not as it should be. Is that right?
Well, I'm in one of the kids' bedrooms. So I was just having a look around to make sure there wasn't anything that's incriminating me in any way. I think we're clear.
Okay, great. Well, it's great to have you here and joining us. Really pleased. Now, you mentioned one of the kids' bedrooms. Tell us a little bit about your family. What's the situation there at the moment?
Okay, so I'm married to Amy, my wife. We've been married for 18 years, and we have together 5 kids, ranging between, imagine that, 5 kids, ranging between the ages of 2 and 13. So life is
2 and 13. Wow, so you're very busy. So we do appreciate you giving us this time this evening. That's great. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Now, let's start at the beginning, shall we? Go back to your childhood.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good place to start. Describe, Jamie, your family life as a child growing up. What was that like?
Yeah, well, I was born to obviously to my mum and my dad. My mum is from Malaysia. She's a Malaysian woman. The family moved over to England, to London, and my granddad joined the RAF. And my mum very early on married my dad at the age of 17. He was a soldier in the lifeguards, and not long after, so by about the age of 18, I was born as their first child. Unfortunately, with I think the pressures of both quite young. So my mum was 18 and my dad was about 21. They just found their marriage increasingly difficult, and my dad was away a lot, and I think he was up to all sorts, and it meant the marriage didn't last. So I was only young, don't remember any of it, but by about the age of 3, my parents had broke up. My mum, it was me and my younger brother. My mum was pregnant at the time, and so we just moved to a council estate in the southern counties in a place called Uckfield. Unfortunately, my mum didn't feel able to look after the third child. So the third child was, my sister was adopted out from very early on. And that was kind of sort of our life, really, growing up for a little bit with single mum on benefits in a council estate down in the south. But, you know, life wasn't that much to moan about, even though I had a bit of a rocky start. My mum met my stepdad. He filled the void of being a father, raised us very lovingly. So I eventually knew what it meant, even though I had no real contact with my natural dad. I call him my bio dad. I knew what it meant to be raised in a fairly sort of loving family. My mum had maybe had not the best start to her relationship with my stepdad, and she broke it up, and she said, look, I can't be married to you, or sorry, I can't be sleeping with you because you're not a Christian. I am. That means more to me. I've got to honor God. And so they broke up, and my stepdad went away and said, I want to know who this person is, this God that she loves more than me. And he, in his search, ended up finding God himself. And then eventually, somewhere down the line, God sort of redeemed this whole messy situation. And I was raised by two sort of very loving Christian parents in the South.
So, I mean, despite all the kind of mess that you described, I guess growing up, initially going to school and things like that, it was kind of a happy sort of more stable setting in the end.
Well, it was. So, I mean, I know, you know, I'm 41. Maybe the lighting is being quite generous on this program. It makes me look a bit younger, but and I do moisturize frequently. But you might, as I alluded to, my mum was from Malaysia, and where I grew up in the sort of the early 80s, in this little sort of southern county town or village where I went to school, there weren't many people from different backgrounds at all, really. So that meant that we and my brother were the victim of sort of racial abuse. And so even though I had every reason to be quite happy from home life, at school it was vastly different. And I can just remember being bullied and sort of picked on left, right, and centre. And so actually I was quite miserable growing up. I had real sort of self sort of identity sort of issues. I would spend, I can think back now, many a playground just hiding away in the toilets because I didn't want to be filled in or picked on, and that led to other things like self-harming with razor blades or you know, just I think I came to a point in my life where I thought, well, how can I sort of earn their respect? And that meant I was always the one who played a bit of an idiot and always tested boundaries. So I was always a naughty one at school, in trouble with the police, you know, getting in trouble for shoplifting and eventually breaking into people's houses as a young sort of juvenile, and just from being bullied and being the one hiding in their toilets to being sort of fairly well respected for all the wrong reasons, for being the one who was the wally at school. So that was
How old were you at this point? It's sort of early teens, was it?
Yep. So I started quite young. So all of this was taking place when I was about sort of 12, 13, 14. And then I got to the age of about 14, really sort of starting to ask questions, you know, as a young teenager searching through life. I wanted to know who my dad was, my natural dad. I barely saw him growing up. Sometimes it would only be, you know, once every 2 years. And whenever I did see him, he'd show up with gifts. And so, you know, and he had this sort of elaborate job as this bodyguard in America. And I wanted to know a bit more about him and what he did. And I gave my parents real jip and said I wanted to go and live with my dad. And so by the age of 14, they reluctantly agreed. And they sent me on a plane to America to go and live with my dad. So,
Wow.
so a lot going on before 15 years old.
Yeah, dear me. And how did that turn out, going to live with your dad?
Well, it was a wonderful place. He lived in a place called Del Mar, San Diego, California. So it was like everyone as a young kid. So we were in this apartment, or whatever they call it, condo, by the beach. You'd finish fairly early at school, and you'd just be during the afternoons down at the beach having fun. But even though I guess there was so much to be happy and thankful for, my stepmom was a real nutter, and we just didn't get on. We just clashed, and so it got to the point where I found it so difficult living with my stepmom that I decided that I needed to find a way out, which sort of culminated in the fact that when my stepmom and my dad said we're going back to England to do a hiking trip, they left me on my own in America, so 15 years old, and they left me with this very dubious couple from their work who introduced me to drugs, and I started getting involved with that. I can remember one day I had this massive sort of party and everyone showed up and they just ransacked the flat. You can imagine they took her engagement rings, the TV, they completely looted the place. And it just, when my stepmom came back, that was it. It was a really difficult relationship to be in. And so the solution for me was I went down to, I took my dad's car, I went down to his work. He worked in the gym at this point. I broke through all the lockers. I stole as much cash as I could. I got someone to drop me off at the airport and I just flew back home. And so at the age, just before I hit 15 years old, I was back home in England. My parents, my mum and my stepdad, they had moved to go to Bible school in South Africa at the time. So I didn't have anywhere to live. I didn't want to live with any family or be told what to do because I was quite rebellious. But my friend from school, they said, well, we've got this old sort of barn attached to our house. You can just stay there so you're not on the streets. And that was the next period of my life, living in this sort of derelict barn, feeling very sorry for my life and the turn it had taken.
That's quite a story for 16 years. You've covered a lot there. I mean, bullying and then estrangement from your family. And I mean, that must have had a profound effect on you as a 16, 17-year-old, and then living rough. I mean, what was going on internally? What was going on in your mind?
Well, a lot of questions, really. And if I may, I did have questions about God. So as someone that was brought up to church, had some sort of a relationship with God, certainly brought up to believe God was true and believed God was real and had some relationship with him as a child. The questions I started to have at this point was, a lot of anger and a lot of bitterness, both towards my family and towards God, asking questions like, God, if you're real, why is this all going on? And why does no one seem bothered with my situation? I was pretty warped back then. I couldn't see it as my own making, but I just was very angry. Just drinking a lot, trying to take drugs when I could, stealing, doing all sorts. I went and lived with my auntie and uncle in Essex, which is where I picked up my posh accent from. A place called Basildon, which is one of the cultural capitals of the world. Yes. And for all the wrong reasons. And I had a chance to start again, to go to school, get qualifications, but I didn't. I was just again into drugs and all sorts of stupid things. And I left school with no qualifications. I got expelled at the very end, and I left school with no qualifications. And my life just really went from worse to worse, just going from job to job during my early teenage years. And by the age of 18, I knew I needed to do something, or I was either going to end up dead from drugs or in prison because of the stupid activities I was getting up to. And so that was really one of the big major points in my life where I knew I needed to do something to turn my life around at 18.
Yeah. And then the big step was joining the army. Was that right? How did that happen? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it was indeed. So I come from a family that pretty much all were in the military. My dad, as I said, my uncles, my granddads, my cousins, they were all in the army. And even though I had a very ropey relationship with my dad, there was always this one consistent demand. And it was, when you get older, join the army. And my dad always said to me, look, you've got to join one of these more elite regiments. I couldn't have got in many others because I didn't have any qualifications, but so there wasn't much choice. But he said, make sure you join one of the elite ones, which was either be a Marine or be a paratrooper. And I thought to myself, well, I don't want to run around and get wet. I'll jump out of planes and be a paratrooper, God willing. And to this day, I feel very duped because I also got very wet as a paratrooper. So that didn't work out. But
so tell us about the process. I mean, you're 18, 19 in Basildon. How do you become a paratrooper?
Well, it's a very arduous, tough course. Certainly at the time, it was one of the longest regular army training regimes in the world. They would claim to be one of the more elite. I don't need me to go on about it. I'm sure many people have heard of what paratroopers are and what they do. You can read about them. But it was, high dropout rates. But I can just remember we started maybe with about 90, and by the very end, it's maybe about 17 at the end. And here I was, this sort of scrawny, lanky 18-year-old. And I just kept on. The thing that got me through it was I've let down my family so much, and they're just expecting me to fail. because I was a loser, and I just wanted to prove them wrong. And so that just turned into real sort of grit and determination. And after sort of, I think, about 33 weeks of literally hell, being shouted at, and just all sorts of other sort of physical punishment, I got to the other end, graduated as a paratrooper, got my wings, and went off to battalion, which for me was in Dover.
Wow. That's an amazing kind of self-discipline and determination, I guess, from where you'd come from to get there. It was an amazing achievement.
It was extreme. I don't think it was a bad thing at all. Maybe when we're looking around and seeing some of our wayward teenagers, it certainly straightened me out and gave me, then taught me to respect my elders, and yet gave me something to be proud of. I mean, I thought at 18 years old, or 19 by the time I graduated or passed out as a paratrooper, I thought, well, this is what I've been looking for in life. Maybe where family have let me down and God has failed, I felt I had respect. I had a bit of money. I had my freedom, my independence. I was wearing the beret of the elite parachute regiment, traveling the world. I was doing things that kids just dream of, as a 19-year-old, firing rocket launchers and free fall, and going to the Arctic and living with Inuits in igloos, and doing all sorts of really crazy things that you can only ever dream of, fast roping out of helicopters. I thought this is what I've been looking for in life. I had friends that I knew would lay their life down for me, and I would for them. And so I just felt like I was in an unbeatable family, and this is what I'd been made for and was looking for in life, in the parachute regiment. So
yeah, right. So for a while, I guess things were coming together, and you were in a good place.
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? So this is my problem. Even though I had the high of being a paratrooper and doing some of these crazy things I've explained to you, I was not a happy soul. I was very restless, and I hadn't addressed any of these issues that I went into the army with. So I was deeply bitter. I was very angry. I hated my parents. And these things were only really in quite a sort of aggressive environment, only intensified. I'm not the biggest, toughest guy in the world. I'm not claiming to be. That's not my story. There are people far harder and tougher than I ever will be and ever was. But all of these sort of feelings I had were just amplified. And so I was downtown, getting drunk, getting in fights, 2-3 times a week. My levels of depravity reached to prostitution. I was deeply hooked on pornography. Just a very angry, aggressive person. And I was searching. I couldn't, even though I was, again, I had every reason to be happy. I was restless. I tried different job avenues. So within the parachute regiment, I worked for some low-level intelligence units, and I changed to become a reconnaissance soldier in the paras. I got promoted to like a lance corporal to earn a bit more money, and I thought maybe this would make me more happy. Money in the bank, respect, authority, but none of these things made me happy in the long run. They did for a short time, I'm not gonna lie. A bit more money gave me a bit more pleasure, but eventually all of these things faded away, and I was left looking for the next high or something to satisfy my restless heart. Yeah,
very interesting. Yeah, very interesting to hear that. I guess that's an insight, isn't it? That externally things can be going so well, but internally there's a war going on. And talking of war, that's where you ended up, wasn't it? I mean, tell us about being called up to serve in a real war.
Yeah. So if I may bridge a gap slightly, if that's okay.
Sure.
So in this period of restlessness, there was one continual sort of consistent voice, and it was the one of my mother. And my mother put the fear of God into me. I'm telling you, she did. And so literally every week without fail, and this is good, a good call to any sort of worried parents with wayward kids, but that was me. So, but my mum would always consistently say to me, get to church, go to church, go to church, go to church. And I just thought, oh, no, I can't be bothered with church. I know what they're like. They're just going to judge me and think I'm a weirdo or a nutter. But anyway, this innocent soldier in an elite unit, but I was trying to find a church and I got lost. And I was going to just make my way back home, watch football instead or something at the barracks. When I went past this church, and I thought, I'll go in this one. How bad can it be? And I went in, and it was full on wacky. And they were in there dancing around with their hands in the air. I just thought, these people are nuts. But, rather kindly, they said, okay, go. They ushered me to the front of the church, okay, sitting in the front rows. And I felt so awkward. And I just thought, well, as soon as this is done and we've done our 2 fast songs, 2 slow ones, had some biscuits, I'm going home. I ain't coming back here again. But I was to meet someone eventually within these church circles that I fancied, and I kept going back to church. And suddenly, I don't know what the pastor thought, this guy just showing up on the scene, left, right, and centre, volunteering for everything, doing the toilets, everything, coming along to all the camps, buying all the CDs, everything. And it was all because of this girl. And it was in this sort of early days of a relationship that, as things were starting to get a bit more serious, that I got the call up to go to Iraq in 2003. And so we were part of the spearhead unit that went in for the invasion in the south of Iraq to go and secure the oil fields. And here I was as a young 23-year-old in Iraq. And whilst my views are very differently now, I think the whole thing's a mess at the time. If I'm being honest, if you allow me, I just went, and I wanted to go to war and blow things up and kill people, if I'm being honest. And that's nothing I'm proud of, but that was my attitude back then. And it was a real slap in the face being in the middle of a war in Iraq.
So in a sense, you've started going to church, and maybe God is kind of coming onto the radar a bit more, and then you're whisked away, and a love story's beginning as well, but then you're whisked away to Iraq. And yet something profound happened through that experience. I mean, it must have been a pretty profound experience generally to experience war, but then there was some dramatic things that happened. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so look, here's the script. So I was going to church. I was sort of dating, if you like, a Christian girl. I had Christian parents, brought up going to church. Everything I thought justified myself saying I was a Christian. I went to like the Soul Survivor camps. I had all the CD. I did it all. Okay, I went to church twice on a Sunday. But here was the problem, is that even though I did all of these things and would have called myself a Christian, born in a Christian country, it would have been fair to have said at the time, I didn't know what it meant to really surrender my heart to Christ. And so I, looking back, I'm reminded of a verse in the Bible where God is talking to his people. And he says, look, you do all of these things, you say your prayers, you sing your songs, but your heart is far from me. And that was me. My heart just wasn't right with God. I had not surrendered my life. I was at church, and the next day I was out fighting, messing around, cheating on my fiance, and all of these things. And it took a good couple of wake-up calls, and the first of which I pinpoint to Iraq. So as I said, I was in a reconnaissance unit. Again, I'm not glamorizing the situation. What the guys have been through in Afghanistan is far worse than what I experienced, but this was mine. And we had just come back from doing a reconnaissance mission. I'd be on top of the Land Rover with the machine gun and the comms. And we just come back from doing a job, and they were firing sort of artillery, and they were getting closer and closer. And one big explosion happened, and metals came so close, and it smashed the side of my Land Rover so close I could feel the heat off of it. And it was almost at this point of time, I just had this sort of strange sense that there was a higher power looking after me. It's almost like he was saying, don't worry, I'm looking after you. And it really stood out to me. And it made me really think, wow, if that was a bit close, that would have taken my head off. And it just from that point, even though everything was going on and all these airstrikes and stuff and loose fire, I just had this strange peace that I was being looked after by God. And that, alongside with my mum sending me all these Christian literature and blueies and in the post to me, just telling me stuff like Psalm 91 and Amazing Grace song sheets and all sorts of things. I just had this strange sense that God was with me. So that was my first wake up call, if you like. My short time in Iraq passed. I came home. I got married to that girl shortly after that. I met at church, Amy, in Surrey. And here I had this opportunity again, to start my life all over, to build on this experience I had with God and with my wife and at church. But to my shame, I didn't. I kept on rebelling. I wasn't willing to surrender everything. And I was, you know, as a married man now downtown, chasing girls, getting drunk, getting in fights, and really I blew it all over again. So that was my first wake up call, one of two.
Yeah. So you're still a paratrooper. You've come back from Iraq. You're still in this lifestyle, I guess, a fairly macho kind of culture. And yet you've got married. You've started a family. You're living kind of two worlds, really. What happened then to sort of really sort of change things?
Yeah, so no family at this point, just Amy and I, but not taking the marriage seriously. And then the second thing that I can really sort of pinpoint, where I really felt like, hey, God is really trying to sort of wake me up to my sinful lifestyle and show me that I'm taking this all for granted. I'm not living my life for Him, and I'm not living my life for my wife or anything like that. And so it was out when we were parachuting in a place called Brize Norton, a big RAF base down sort of Oxford way. And I've done this many a time before. And I was usually the one winding the new guys up on the back of the plane. I do little things like, I'm trying to find a little bit now, I do little things like I'd pull stuff out the young guys, parachutes and a bit of rope and stuff that I had in my pocket and say, oh, that just came out your parachute. I don't know if that's okay, but you'll be all right. So I was the guy, I was the joker, okay? But this time something felt wrong for me as a fairly sort of seasoned paratrooper. Something just felt wrong in my gut. But I thought, well, anyway, I don't want them to make fun of me. I'm supposed to be an example. So the tailgate went down. I was first out. I jumped out. I looked up, and instead of sort of seeing a normal sort of rectangular parachute, so all my lines had wrapped around one side. And so that, I don't know, my hand actions are communicating well. So one side was inflated, one side was scrunched, and that meant I was sort of spiraling like that.
Yep.
And this was maybe around sort of 3,000 foot in the air. And I just knew I had to do something because my legs were flailing all over the place. So the only thing you can really do is you can either try and land it, but you'll probably break your back or, your legs, or maybe even die. So I knew that wasn't an option. So I thought I'll just pull my second parachute. So I shouted out to my mates, I'm going to pull my second parachute. I yanked it out. And just in case you're waiting with bated breath, don't worry, I live. That's why I'm here today to tell the story. So don't worry.
You spoiled the jeopardy.
Yeah, so I pulled it, and your first one disappears, and you sort of fall for a bit, plummeting, and you're pulling out your lines to get your second one to inflate. And I can remember very clearly, my friends are still in the military, say exactly what I'm saying is the truth. I fell right past them, and I just thought during that short period, I'm going to die. Where's my parachute? I'm going to die. But it didn't. My reserve parachute came out. It came down backwards. In the army, we fast used to say the speed of 1,000 gazelles. So there's one for you tonight. So we used to say the speed of 1,000 gazelles, which means fast. And I just came down backwards, and I had one of the best landings of my life. And I just couldn't believe it. I was just standing there in absolute shock. And I just felt like that was another period where, again, I had this sort of strong, overwhelming sense that God was looking after me, and His hand was upon my life, and it was going to be okay. And that really, for me, was like a period where the light switch came on in my life and set me on a new path of humility to try and understand this God who I thought had saved my life on these two occasions.
Wow. Yeah, so that must have been a profound effect, because you thought you were going to die, basically. Your life, when people talk about their life flashing before them, I guess that was an experience you had, and then suddenly to come out of that was amazing. So take us from that point on. How did things change then from that, real awakening?
Yeah, well, just in a sort of a jumbled way, I think it would be fair to say it made me want to start to take life seriously. As a young guy, maybe 24, 25 now, I'd always lived my life like I could just get right with God when I was on my deathbed. I just thought, I'm going to live my life how I want now, do what I want. No one's going to tell me otherwise. Live in the fast lane. And just when I'm older, on my deathbed, I'll throw up a prayer to God and that'll be all right. I'll just get myself sorted out then. But now I realise that, you know, life is fragile and you don't need to be sent to Iraq or thrown out of a plane to realise these things. You know, many of us have seen that over the last year and a half with what's been going on. Many of us have picked up the newspapers or seen on the news channels that life is so fragile, we've lost loved ones, and we just can't take life for granted. And I was. And I realise that now. And I realised actually, if what this preacher's telling me on Sunday and what my mum keeps banging on about, that I will have to stand before God on Judgment Day. There is such a thing as heaven and yes, hell. I realised that I wasn't sure where I would be going because even though I was saying I was a Christian, my life was very different. And so, or my actions and the fruit of my life was very different. So I went back to church with a new humility. What was called the gospel was preached, and I started to hear it, and I felt the call to repent, to ask God for forgiveness of my sins, but not just to say sorry, but to turn away from them and go in a different direction. That was what I was doing before. And so I asked God for his help. I said, look, Lord, my marriage is going down the drain, down the toilet. My life is a mess. I'm broken. I'm angry. I'm violent. I'm an addict. I need your help. Please, Lord, I believe you died on the cross for me. You've forgiven me of my sins. If I come now by faith and put my trust in you and ask you to forgive me, please cleanse me and make me what the Bible said was a new creation. And I can remember as I did these things that God just in his sovereignty just began to change my life around and slowly rebuild it. And that was a messy journey. I had a lot to deal with. But I never have since that day felt alone and felt like God has just been doing something wonderful. And if you allow me to bang on a bit more, he healed my marriage to my wife after confessing everything I did. Initially, after a period of reconciliation, God restored our marriage. That was, you know, my wife had walked out; it was done. But God restored our marriage. God brought me a healing. This anger I had towards my family, God has redeemed and restored that, and I have a good relationship with my family. God has taken this person who hated his life, who hated everything about the way he looked and where his mum was from, and used to self-harm and hide behind drink and drugs. God has told me who I am in Christ, and that he's made me his son and his child, and he's given me something to live for, and he's given me something to sing about and rejoice. And I'm just overwhelmed when I think that God did that for me. You know, someone so rotten and so far away and so angry and so bitter, that God would send Jesus for me, and that just led me on the path to eventually leaving the forces, to concentrating on my marriage with Amy, and above all, sort of pursuing this relationship. I wanted to know Jesus more, the Jesus that saved me. And so after 8 years in the forces, I left, and my life began a new chapter.
That's great to hear. Just to wind back a little bit, you came to understand about Jesus Christ being God's son but dying on a cross. That was you mentioned the gospel. Presumably that's the good news, that Jesus has taken the wrong that you've done so that you can be forgiven. That was the kind of crux of it, was it?
Yeah, absolutely. So to think that everything that I had done wrong, that Jesus, who was innocent and pure and perfect, came to earth for people like me, and he went through the cruel humiliation and barbaric sort of savage method of being crucified on a cross, and everything that I had done had been put on him, and he took it, my punishment, the wrath of God for me. Was just overwhelming that he would do that for me. So you need to understand that I was from a unit where I thought there was no greater bond than what I had with my fellow comrades. You know what I'm saying? Paratrooper would die for each other. Actually, reality was, even though I knew that to be true and it would have happened, even my friends let me down, even my family let me down. But in the gospel, I saw the words of Jesus where he spoke about he was laying down his life for us, his friends, and just that whole sort of aspect of laying his life down for me. No greater love than this was what sort of spoke volumes to me about the gospel, and I just had to surrender and run to him.
Amazing. Yeah. Tell us now, I mean, that is great. Obviously, you begin to change then. Inevitably, this powerful love comes into your life. How did that affect? Obviously, it affects all your relationships. You've mentioned your marriage. What about your colleagues, fellow
Yeah.
soldiers? How did they respond to the kind of what was going on in your life?
Well, they thought I was lying. They thought I was a blagger. They literally thought I was going out with this girl because I just wanted to get in bed with her. That's what they thought. They thought I was just doing this because I was trying to, if you allow me to be crass, this is literally what they said, because they thought I was trying to score over, a nice Christian girl. So they just thought, come on, Jim or Jamie, that we know what you're up to. But after a period of time, when they realised actually this Jim that was my name, Jim from the block, he was stopped watching pornography. He was trying harder not to F every other word. He wasn't out getting plastered. He was going to church, and just there were things in his life that would change him. And it took a while. They still kept on saying I was blagging, but here I am, 18, or sorry, however many years later, still abiding by I'm a Christian. I've been changed, and hopefully that's been a witness to them.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, you mentioned coming out of the army. I guess that's not a smooth process for you, sort of emotionally, psychologically. How did that happen? How did God help you?
Well, God needed to help me, because when you say you're leaving the brotherhood, that was me. You give a year's notice and basically in charge of the toilets for a year. So I needed God's help. So after a year coming out, not knowing what to do, sort of pretty lost really. If you were to look at my CV, it would say can run fast, jump out of planes and stab sandbags. I had no GCSEs, as I told you. So I had nothing. Only failed jobs and a long list of failure, and then being a paratrooper. So I didn't know what to do, how I was going to provide for Amy, who was at law school at the time. But someone from church, a businessman who owned a painting decorating company. I was like, I was the Asian Frank Spencer of the painter and decorating world. Okay, I was not good, but he took great mercy on me, and he paid me as good as any of his other employees. Gave me the same rates, and gave me a wonderful opportunity to make a living. And here I was, just sort of finding my feet, and I was doing that for a little bit of time. But after a while, I began to sense I wanted to serve the Lord in some sense. I just felt like I had a voice to be, or I had a story to be able to tell people. I wanted to see people from broken lives and broken backgrounds, hopeless, sort of struggling maybe with some of the same things as me, to be able to tell them, look, Jesus saves, Jesus changed lives, he's real. Listen to my story. I'll tell you about him. And so that meant I was working for a Christian organization. I was just helping out. I just wanted to do anything. That was carrying books around or acting as a driver, but eventually got the opportunity to share my story, and that led me into prisons, and including the military prison in Colchester, going back there. And that led me to go to like youth events or youth rehabilitation centres, going to orphanages and travelling sort of here, there and everywhere to be able to tell people about my story. But more importantly than that, what changed me, and that was this gospel I've tried to share with you tonight, that Jesus changes lives, Jesus saves. And so it was just wonderful to be able to do that.
That's fantastic. Now, obviously, I mean, you've had the opportunity to tell that story to many people. I'm guessing that quite a lot of people have been helped by that. Is that the case? Have you come across people who've really sort of responded to what you've had to say?
Yeah. So I mean, this is the thing. I've always been aware of my sort of of my state. So I'm not qualified, and like I say, I left school with nothing. So I know I'm not the most eloquent of people or educated of people, but I've always been acutely aware that as I just make myself sort of vulnerable and say, Lord, and I'm broken. I don't come from the best of stock or background, but please use me and use the mistakes of my story. I just found that God has always shown his power, as he said he would, in his weakness. And it reminds me of, and there are several circumstances, but one maybe in Belgium. I went to a prison in there, and I went, and I felt like I communicated really powerfully. I was quite sort of passionate about Jesus saves, Jesus did this in my life, and just asked, okay, if anyone wants to, maybe also surrender their lives to Christ, and come speak to me. And no one did. And I went back and I thought, oh, okay, so I got that one wrong. And then I just heard the story not long after the chaplain. And they said that one of the young men was in his prison bed, and he dreamt he was falling out of a plane, and his parachute didn't open, and he fell to the ground and he died. And he realized, having heard the gospel that night, that he was going to die and go to hell. He realized that he had not surrendered to Christ. And so he called for the chaplain. The chaplain got them. I wasn't even there. I was probably in England. But the chaplain led them to the Lord, down on his knees in his prison block, and he gave his life to Christ. And it just then reminded me that, that is God. God is the initiator in this, and God is the one who is at work changing lives. So I can't do that. I can just tell, and I can sow seeds, but it is God alone that changes the heart and the rebellious mind and life. And that just reminds me, I've seen many examples like that of God, as you tell his story in whatever jumbled, sort of fragile way, but with belief in your heart, that is God that changes lives. And it's been such a wonderful privilege to be able to talk about him to people.
Well, we want to thank you for doing so this evening. It's been really, really enlightening, I think, just to hear about that, the reality of God, faith in Jesus Christ that changes people and changes people's hearts. So we do want to thank you, Jamie, for sharing that story tonight. Now, I know that while we've been talking, there have been perhaps people sending in texts or questions. So at this point, it might be good just to call in Dave. Dave's been fielding any texts that's been coming in, and it might be nice just to hear, Dave, if there's been any questions. Hi.
Hey there. Well, thanks, Devon, Jamie, and for sharing your story. It's been really helpful. Just had one or two questions. Just one question, I think, coming at the moment, but there may well be a few more coming in. I think the stream's a little bit behind where we are live. But the first one I did have in was, I think from someone who might have been in the forces themselves, who said, did you meet any scripture readers while serving or get involved with Sazra at all?
Thanks. Yeah, so we were quite an awkward bunch, and we were quite isolated where we were in Dover and Colchester, and we didn't have much input from Sazra scripture readers, or maybe a little bit scripture readers, or the chaplains, but we never really saw a chaplain at all. But we had one chaplain, okay, and he was a Baptist chaplain. He's now the minister of a Baptist church in Colchester, and he really spent time getting to know us, and he really made him stand out, that this was a chaplain that came to us in the trenches, and he spent time getting to know the soldiers, prayed with them, and he was a real sort of inspiration, a man that really sort of lived out his faith. And it would probably be fairer to say that since leaving the forces, I've become more acutely aware of scripture readers, of the Armed Forces Christian Union. And in fact, I've got some booklets. If anyone wants them, they're free of charge. I can send them to Devon, and they're my little testimony booklets, and they have been funded by Sazra, so they're readily available. What I've just said in like a cool little storybook by Sazra. They're doing a great work, and I've got a few friends in there now that are serving in Sazra and as chaplains.
Great. Another one we had was just about your readjustment when you came out of the forces. How did you find the readjustment coming out of the army, and what things helped you at that time?
Yeah, no, it's incredibly difficult. So I think the stats are shocking, like the amount of soldiers that come out of the forces. Many of them turn to the bottle. A lot of them end up homeless or integrating themselves into the workplace. It's certainly got a lot better. But when I left, the transitional period wasn't very good. Even sadly, I've lost friends who've committed suicide to PTSD coming out and just really sort of struggling to find a sense of value and belonging in society. And again, this just hammers home to me that as good as the military is, and being a part of that, we are made and we are wired to be in a relationship with our Creator, and we're restless until, as someone famous once said, until our souls find rest in Him. So it's incredibly difficult, but coming to faith and having Jesus help me through that was, gave me great strength. And something I didn't say, what I'd like to maybe highlight was coming to faith didn't make life any easier. Okay, so when I did in our first year, lost my grandmother, lost my lovely dog, everything was just going wrong. Things were just falling apart financially and all sorts. Even like now in the last year, finding out my wife's got MS, and along the way we lost, my wife miscarried our first child. I can remember thinking, we got to maybe about 19 weeks, and my wife miscarried, and she had to give a birth, and it was a boy. And I can just remember going to the toilet and just crying in the toilet, this big so-called tough paratrooper in the toilet, just crying, saying, God, why am I going through this? I'm a Christian. Why am I going through this? Why is this happening to me? And again, it's just at that time that I just sensed that God was with me, and it was enough. And he led me to His word, and I was comforted by His word and by His Spirit. And it just, so life hasn't been easy. And the transition wasn't. I had a lot of stuff to deal with, the shackles of pornography and the anger and addiction. But God, in His power, has released me and set me free from these things, and certainly been a shepherd for me during these periods. And I'm just so grateful to do life in this broken world that we live in, with Christ by my side, leading me home. So difficult, but Christ is my strength.
Yeah, appreciate your honesty there, Jamie. Just as you talk about those things, it's helpful. Another one here. What if I've not had a dramatic life story like yours? Would God still be interested in me?
Absolutely, yeah. So I used to work with people with different testimonies. Okay, all sorts of funky testimonies, basically of a bunch of people that lived idiotic lifestyles or made stupid mistakes, and God still, waking and giving those people up a new chance. And it's that I find that amazing. But you know what, I find the best testimony listening to someone like my wife. Okay, brought up in a Christian family, always loved God, always sought to honor God, always been faithful to God, and God's sort of hand has just always been upon her. And his favor and his grace towards her. A lovely sort of Christian testimony, and those to me are the best. I'm telling you now, I look back and think I really wish as a young guy I had the strength of character to stand up to what I knew was wrong, to go with what my parents were teaching me the right way, and my youth leaders, my pastor, and all the rest of it. And I wish I just lived my life for Christ as a young guy and dedicated myself for all of those years, and not done it this way. But it is what it is. I'm here by the grace of God. But the other testimonies, honest truth, are far more inspirational to me. And that's what I'm praying for my boys and my young daughter, that they won't deviate from the path, and that they will just live their lives full on for Jesus, because that to me is the testimony.
Great. Yeah. Well, one last question, but if you do have any more, do fire them in the next sort of 30 seconds. The last one I've got, though, at the moment is, what's your relationship like with your parents now? You obviously mentioned the two of them earlier on in the story, and quite different types of people, but tell us about that.
Good question. Yeah, so I get on really well with my mum and my stepdad. They're from a different background to me, but they pastor a church down in London, and so close with them. When I need good Malaysian food, I'm straight down there for a good feed, and they're great. And also my dad, that took a bit longer. We're quite similar in many ways. So we rub each other up the wrong way, but we have a good relationship now. He lives close to where we are, from Manchester. He lives in the Lake District, and we get on really well. And I guess part of him still thinks I'm I'm faking it, or I'm a Christian lunatic or whatever. But you know, I've had the chance to talk to him about Jesus, and maybe one day, God willing, he'll open his eyes to the gospel as well. But God has been so kind and so gracious, and restored all of these relationships in my life as well, more than I could possibly ask for.
Oh, that's good to hear, and thank you again, Jamie. I'll just hand back over to Devon now, but thanks for sharing your story.
Welcome, Dave. Yeah.
Yes, thanks again, Jamie, and thanks for listening. For everybody out there who's been tuning into this session, it's been great. Maybe what we've discussed, what you've heard, has raised some questions or thoughts in your own mind. If you'd like to know more about the Christian faith, please go to our website, Emmanuel Church Lethwich website, and on there you'll find something called See for Yourself, and it's just 4 sessions. You hear my voice, I'm afraid, if it's my voice on it, but it takes you through Mark's Gospel, the Gospel of Mark. If maybe you've never read anything about the life of Jesus, well, the Gospels are about the life of Jesus and explain the good news that Jamie's been sharing this evening. So go onto that website and you can just listen, yourself and read the Gospel for yourself. It's called See for Yourself, and I hope that that'll be helpful to anybody who's wanting to find out more about this Jesus and the good news that he offers. So that's it for this evening. I do want to thank you for tuning in, and next month we'll do something similar, and it'll be Dr. Lisa Williams. Thanks again, Jamie, for joining us. Thanks ever so much. Bye-bye, everybody. God bless.